In the quiet suburban city of Santa Clarita, California, the summer of 1998 was shattered by a crime so incomprehensible it would forever be etched into the annals of American true crime history. Sandi Dawn Nieves, a 34-year-old mother, was convicted of one of the most heinous acts imaginable, the intentional killing of her 4 young daughters in a calculated and tragic arson. This case would become a stark reminder of the complexities of mental health, family dysfunction, and the devastating consequences of unchecked rage. Through court records, testimonies, and interviews, this documentary delves into the harrowing story of Sandi Dawn Nieves, piecing together the life that led her to that fateful day and exploring the aftermath of her unimaginable act. Born in 1964 in Los Angeles, California, Sandi grew up in a turbulent household marked by instability and strife. Friends and family described her as a bright child with a spark for creativity. However, her upbringing was far from idyllic. Sandi's parents divorced when she was young, and she spent much of her formative years being shuffled between relatives. The lack of a stable home life planted seeds of insecurity and resentment, which would later manifest in troubling ways. Sandi married young, seeking an escape from her chaotic upbringing. However, her relationships were marred by conflict, infidelity, and abuse. By the time she reached her early 30s, Sandi was a single mother of 4 daughters and 1 son. Her life was an ongoing struggle, balancing the demands of motherhood with financial woes and a deepening sense of despair. By 1998, Sandi was embroiled in a bitter custody battle with her ex-husband, who was seeking full custody of their children. The legal proceedings were emotionally taxing, leaving her feeling cornered and powerless. According to court psychologists, Sandi exhibited signs of severe depression, borderline personality disorder, and narcissistic tendencies. Witnesses noted that her behavior in the months leading up to the crime grew increasingly erratic. She often expressed feelings of betrayal and anger toward her ex-husband, the legal system, and even her children, whom she saw as pawns in her ongoing battle. Despite the outward image of a devoted mother, cracks in her facade began to show. On the night of July 1, 1998, Sandi reached her breaking point. In what prosecutors would later describe as a premeditated act, she prepared a dinner for her children, watched movies with them, and then carried out her plan. In the early hours of July 2, 1998, neighbors reported hearing screams and seeing smoke billowing from Sandi's suburban home. Firefighters arrived to a harrowing scene, a raging fire consuming the house. Inside, they discovered the bodies of 4 girls aged 5, 7, 11, and 12 alongside Sandi and her 14-year-old son, who had managed to escape. Investigators quickly ruled the fire as arson. Evidence showed that Sandi had poured gasoline throughout the house and ignited it using a match. Autopsy reports revealed that the girls succumbed to smoke inhalation before the flames reached them, a small mercy amid the horror. The son, who survived the blaze, provided crucial testimony. He recounted his mother's chilling behavior in the hours leading up to the fire, describing how she had locked the doors and windows and methodically carried out her plan. He also recalled her eerie calmness during the chaos, a detail that would become pivotal in her trial. Sandi Dawn Nieves was arrested on charges of first-degree murder and arson. Her trial began in 2000 and captivated the nation. Prosecutors painted her as a calculating killer who sought to punish her ex-husband by taking away what he loved most, their children. They argued that her actions were driven by spite, vindictiveness, and a twisted sense of control. The defense, however, offered a different narrative. They portrayed Sandi as a deeply troubled woman whose mental health struggles rendered her incapable of rational thought. They presented evidence of her long history of abuse, mental illness, and desperation, arguing that she acted in a psychotic state. The trial was emotionally charged, with graphic evidence and heart-wrenching testimonies from family members and first responders. The jury ultimately sided with the prosecution, finding Sandi guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to death, making her one of the few women on California's death row. The case of Sandi Dawn Nieves left a lasting impact on everyone involved. For her surviving son, the trauma of that night and the loss of his sisters were unimaginable. In interviews years later, he described the emotional scars he carried, struggling to reconcile the image of his mother as both a nurturer and a killer. For the community of Santa Clarita, the crime was a wake-up call about the hidden struggles of those around them. Neighbors and friends expressed regret for not recognizing the signs of Sandi's deteriorating mental state sooner, questioning if the tragedy could have been prevented. The legal system also faced scrutiny. Advocates for mental health reform argued that Sandi's case highlighted the need for better support systems for struggling parents, particularly those dealing with mental illness and domestic disputes. More than 2 decades after the crime, Sandi remains on death row, her appeals ongoing. Her case continues to spark debates about the intersection of mental health and the justice system, raising difficult questions about accountability, rehabilitation, and the human capacity for both love and destruction. The story of Sandi Dawn Nieves is one of profound tragedy, a stark reminder of how unresolved pain and unchecked emotions can lead to devastating consequences. It is a case that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the fragility of the human psyche and the importance of compassion and intervention. In the years since the murders, true crime enthusiasts, psychologists, and legal experts have revisited the case, seeking to understand what drove a mother to commit such an unspeakable act. While answers remain elusive, one thing is certain: the lives lost that night will never be forgotten. The names of the 4 girls, so full of promise and potential, are now etched into the collective memory, a somber reminder of the cost of unaddressed trauma and the urgent need for a society that supports its most vulnerable members. For Sandi's surviving son, the years following the tragedy were fraught with challenges. Thrust into the national spotlight as a key witness in his mother's trial, he faced immense pressure. The emotional burden of testifying against the woman who raised him was immense. His statements provided pivotal insights into Sandi's mindset on that fateful night, but they came at the cost of reliving the trauma repeatedly. Family members who took him in after the tragedy described a boy plagued by nightmares and survivor's guilt. Despite their best efforts, the enormity of his loss proved difficult to navigate. Over time, he found some solace in therapy and advocacy, choosing to channel his pain into raising awareness about domestic violence and mental health. The media coverage of the case was relentless, painting Sandi as both a monster and a victim of her circumstances. The public was divided. Some saw her actions as the ultimate betrayal of motherhood, while others empathized with the immense pressures she faced, particularly as a single parent dealing with financial strain and emotional instability. True crime documentaries and books about the case often focused on the societal factors that may have contributed to Sandi's downward spiral. Her life was examined through multiple lenses: mental health, domestic abuse, economic hardship, all factors that painted a complex picture of a woman who felt trapped by her circumstances. One of the enduring legacies of the Sandi Dawn Nieves case is its impact on conversations around mental health. The trial revealed glaring gaps in the support systems available to struggling mothers. Experts argued that Sandi's escalating cries for help were ignored, leaving her without the resources to cope. In the aftermath, mental health professionals and advocacy groups pushed for reforms in how courts handle custody disputes involving parents with mental illness. They also called for increased funding for programs that provide emotional and financial support to vulnerable families. Sandi Dawn Nieves has spent over 2 decades on California's death row. While awaiting execution, she has maintained her innocence in interviews, claiming she was unfairly portrayed by prosecutors. Her appeals have focused on issues such as inadequate representation during her trial and claims that her mental health struggles were not fully considered by the court. Life on death row is isolating, particularly for women. At the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, where Sandi is housed, inmates spend the majority of their time in solitary confinement. Despite these conditions, Sandi has reportedly sought solace in religion, attending Bible studies and counseling sessions offered within the prison. The case of Sandi Dawn Nieves has become a cautionary tale for advocates of family intervention programs. Organizations that focus on preventing family violence cite her story as an example of the dire consequences when warning signs go unheeded. Programs like Safe Families and Mothers on the Brink have since been implemented in various states, offering at-risk parents access to resources such as counseling, financial aid, and mediation services. These programs aim to prevent tragedies by addressing the root causes of familial discord. The story of Sandi Dawn Nieves is a stark reminder that the threads of our lives are often more interconnected than they seem. Her actions, as unfathomable as they were, stemmed from a combination of personal struggles, systemic failures, and societal pressures. Her case urges society to consider the warning signs in those around us and to advocate for a more robust support system for families in crisis. It also highlights the importance of mental health awareness and the need to destigmatize seeking help. As we reflect on this tragic story, it is essential to honor the memory of the young lives lost. The Nieves daughters, each with their own dreams and personalities, were innocent victims of a tragedy that could have been prevented. Their names are now part of vigils, memorials, and campaigns dedicated to family violence awareness. For many, their story is a call to action, a reason to ensure that such a tragedy never happens again. In the end, the case of Sandi Dawn Nieves remains one of the most haunting in California's history, not just for the horrific crime itself, but for the questions it leaves unanswered. What more could have been done to intervene? How do we balance justice with compassion? And how do we prevent the next family from falling through the cracks? These questions may not have easy answers, but they are ones we must continue to ask for the sake of the children we lost, and for the families we have yet to save.